We got to move on here to Jake Paul. Here we go. The chat's going to get upset again. He's taking his talents to MMA with the PFL. Paul has signed a multi-fight contract with the promotion. He will compete in a new division known as Super Fight, with events on pay-per-view. No matchups have been lined up for the YouTube star turned boxer, who intends to compete in both boxing and MMA this year. Quote, I am so dedicated to this that I even offered Nate Diaz a 2-fight deal. First, we box. Then 6 months later, we fight MMA in the PFL Smart Cage and lay it all on the line. If that's not balls, I don't know what is, Nate Diaz. I'm down to fight you in your own damn sport. It's a 2-fight deal. Let's make it happen. So he's actually taking the role because I guess there's some equity for Jake Paul in this whole deal. It's more than just him being, an athlete fighting for the PFL. Yeah, nah, excited? We'll start with you, Danny.
I don't know. I'm kind of in the middle of it. I haven't been like the biggest fan of the whole Jake Paul thing in combat sports. It's been interesting, especially at the beginning. But if you were to retire today, honestly, I wouldn't lose much sleep over it. If John Jones were to retire, I'd be like, come on, fight Ngannou, move up to heavyweight. Like, I definitely feel a little bit different about it. But I'm also not on the train that's a Jake Paul hater that's like, oh, he's terrible for the sport. This sucks. At times I've enjoyed it. At times I've been indifferent. So I think this is very interesting. And for me, like the interesting side comes from like the business aspect of it. I'm really curious to see how PFL launches this pay-per-view series, what it looks like, what it's going to entail. Because say what you want about Jake Paul, but one thing that you can't deny is that he is a very, very good businessman. He surrounds himself by very smart people, and he's managed to find a way to make a ton of money in combat sports, something that it's hard to do. We all know that, that doesn't come very often. So the fact that he's joining forces with PFL and it seems like he's getting equity, as you mentioned, George, his people and himself, they must see something here, an opportunity. And we always talk about the number 2 promotion, right? For a long time, it's been Bellator. I still do think it's Bellator. If you look at compare rosters, who has better quality fighters? I think watching the Rising versus Bellator show, that was a big eye opener as far as like, hey, Bellator's got some really legit talent here. I still think that number 2 is Bellator, but I mean, PFL is changing, and they're certainly trying to do everything they can to climb the ladder and position themselves as number 2. Will this be it? I don't know, but maybe they're onto something here. So I'm more curious about the business aspect of it to see how all this is going to look, how it's going to affect PFL and just the industry as a whole. Because for a long time, I mean, Jake Paul has been linked to MMA, but he hasn't been in MMA, right? It's been boxing. And as far as an MMA fight with the whole offer with Nate Diaz, that I'm not really that into. The boxing, yeah, I'll watch a boxing fight between Nate Diaz and Jake Paul. I have no problem covering it as well. But MMA, I mean, we're already talking about how the debate is, there's Jake Paul's getting all this attention, but he's not a high-level boxer, and that's undeniable. Like, we're not witnessing high-level boxing when he steps in there, and that's okay. But if he switches over to MMA, he's literally starting from scratch. And MMA, there's so many facets to it. If you thought like the boxing wasn't great, the MMA is going to be way worse. And that I'm not really sure I want to see that. I think the boxing's fine. The MMA, I mean, we'll see how good he can get in a few months, but I wouldn't expect a very, very good fight, and that I'm not all that into. So we'll see. We'll see how this plays out.
All right, Nolan, you're up next. Yeah, excited. What'd you think of the Diaz thing?
I mean, I think it's on PFL's end. Obviously, it's smart. I mean, we talked about this with boxing at nauseum, which was Jake Paul brings in a different audience, and I think he's bringing kind of that audience now to MMA. So I'll never hate on it. I think the more people that watch MMA, the better. But I do kind of question perhaps like what the actual prospects of him fighting are to a certain degree. I think if you look at what's unfolded, it's certainly more of a partnership, sort of promotional deal where he'll promote them on social media and maybe he'll show up at some of the events and whatnot. But I'd kind of heard some rumblings of this back in October when he was going to fight Anderson. Obviously, that's under the Showtime banner and this is ESPN, but I kind of heard that it was more of if he wanted to take an MMA fight, he would have to fight under PFL. So for me, if I'm Jake Paul, why would I do this at this point in time? Like, to me, this is something that I would do if I suffered a loss in boxing, if kind of fell off a little bit, like it would be a way to rebound and get people interested in me again. So the fact that they're kind of talking about, he was saying 2023. I think I saw Don Davis say it was going to be 2024. So to me, it seems like they don't necessarily have like a solid plan for him to fight. But if he is going to fight, it will have to be with PFL. So it's interesting. I mean, maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe he will fight there. But I'm not saying he definitely won't. I just think that his focus is probably still on boxing for the time being. I think the Nate Diaz thing would be potentially one of those ways to get him to step inside the MMA cage. Because it has that boxing match attached to it. It has the fact that even if he goes into MMA and gets smoked, like there's a good chance he would beat Nate Diaz in boxing. So it would be even at worst, right? So good on the PFL. I think they're doing a really good job of spicing it up. I don't know how deep their pockets, if they're just going to have an endless supply of money where we're going to continue to see these big name signings, but good on them. It's certainly a healthy competition for that number 2 slot, as we talked about in our year-end awards.
Yeah.
Show.
Mike, I'll spare you. Yeah, nah, I don't want to do all that again.
Right.
But let me ask you this, man. And then, of course, feel free to weigh in on the whole thing. But let me ask you this. You think it'll be closer to like what James Toney did? You know, little cash grab and then he bounced. Or maybe like what Clarissa Shields has done, where she really put in the work, kind of went in and did a couple fights. One went her way, one didn't. But there was a lot of respect, you know, towards her, even though, again, she went 1-1.
I think probably like somewhere in the middle makes probably most sense. Like, I don't think Jake Paul is going to go in there completely unprepared in his mind. Like, I think he is going to probably try to hook up with the right people. I know like Javier Mendez has already come out and said that he would be open to having him come to AKA. So like, I think he's going to get the right people around him. He's going to take it seriously. He's going to train hard. I don't think he's going to like cheat himself in his preparation, whether that actually helps him in the end result, especially if in MMA he's fighting someone like Nate Diaz, who you could argue like that shouldn't even be a sanctionable fight given the difference of experience when it comes to that sport itself. But like, I think if he fights someone like Clarissa Shields did, not, you know, like someone Randy Couture level, like James Toney did, an all-time great of our sport, like maybe he can make a good account of himself. You get him somewhere like in there with the guy who doesn't have much wrestling or jiu-jitsu or considers himself a bit of a striker. Like there's ways that you can do, but don't expect Jake Paul to come in and compete at the highest level of the sport. I mean, this is not the reality of, you know, what happens here, especially maybe it worked, you know, 13, 14, 15 years ago when Brock Lesnar came in with a big of a wrestling background and a lot of athleticism, but you see how much the game has evolved since then. I think that would be really, really difficult to do against a proven MMA fighter. So we'll ultimately see, kind of in the camp with Nolan of like, I'll believe it when I see it fully, when he's like actually booked and making the walk. But you know, we're already seeing the goalposts move a little bit, as Nolan alluded to there too, right? Like it was in the original statement, he's going to fight once boxing, once in MMA in 2023. And then his promoter comes out and says, maybe it'll be early 2024. So we're already getting some mixed messages as far as the timeline on this. But I do agree with one thing, that this is great for PFL's brand. I mean, if they can pull off a Jake Paul versus Nate Diaz fight under their promotion, that is absolutely huge for them. And that is going to be very, very significant. And that would, I think, really elevate their brand a lot. So I'm sure everyone in the organization is crossing their fingers. That's ultimately what happens here. I think just having Jake Paul's name associated is good for PFL's brand, but remains to be seen if he actually gets in there. But I think it's just further showing that he kind of is dabbling a lot in the world of MMA, and that more so of him being like a boxer in that world, he's really associated with our world. And that's why from the jump, given all the things he's kind of said about fighter pay and just like in the sport as a whole, fighting MMA fighters, like he is more of like an MMA guy to a degree than a boxing guy. So this almost feels natural in a way. But yeah, I need to see it actually happen, which I do, if we're making predictions here, think it will.
Nice. I hope it does. That would be massive.